Hey everybody, it's Patrick Escolas with another Banyan Technologies Tire Tracks podcast. We're here live from Connect 24 in Atlanta, Georgia, and I have with me Kevin Huntsman of Mastio and Company, and I think you're the president, right?
I am.
You're
Correct.
the big man in charge. You got to use the mic,
I guess
Kevin.
that's right. No, correct. I am.
No.
Just a fancy term, fancy name.
Well, it's great to have you here, and I know we had you at the last conference and had on the podcast, and one of the things that is always awesome that you do for us here is you give us updates from the industry. And for anyone that's filling in for the first time, how do you get that insight, and what's it showing you right now?
Great question. First off, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on today. It's 2 years since I did this last time, so we won't wait 2 years for the next one.
Time flies
That's
when
right,
you're doing stuff every
That's
day.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. So no, Mastio has been conducting the annual U.S. LTL study, where we talk with shippers across the United States. In 2024, we conducted a little over 1,600 telephone interviews.
And how do you pick them? You just kind of randomly throw darts, or it's just whoever picks up the phone?
Very scientific, actually. So we're trying to make sure we're getting coverage from a geographical perspective.
Okay.
Patrick, we're also trying to make sure we're getting coverage that represents carriers' market share within the industry. So you don't want to overload sample with a very small carrier and not have enough for a big carrier like an Old Dominion. So there's a lot of science behind the sample management, and our team, which does all the heavy lifting of doing the telephone calls, they work very closely with our folks that run the database and the sample to identify who we can reach out to.
Awesome. I imagine that's a whole lot of legwork in the first place before you even get to asking the questions, let alone quantifying all the answers.
Absolutely. That's if the more work we can put in there, it makes the study go a lot smoother. Okay. And it's a much easier process. And I always say, these interviews by telephone, we're interviewing people that are using the carriers, working with the carriers every day, Patrick. So we exist, as I say, at the kindness of others.
Yeah.
The kindness of the shippers giving us feedback, so that we can then in turn share that feedback, bring it all together and share it with the carriers, so they can have and build and develop a better offering to the shippers.
So it's really kind of a symbiotic win-win. Like, hey, you give us some of this data, we're going to tell you what you should be doing or what they're saying about you, and you don't have to outsource or internally have people to go get that feedback yourself.
Absolutely. And over these 20 years, we've conducted nearly 40,000 telephone interviews with LTL shippers over the last 20 years. So it's a pretty big milestone.
That's a pretty,
we like that.
What's your phone bill like? No.
No kidding. Used to be a lot more.
Yeah, I can imagine. No, so what are you finding this year?
It's a good question. So one of the things we're finding is some consistency, especially around performance. Now, when we think about what's important to carriers, which we do a lot of analysis on, we think about carrier is trustworthy.
Sure.
That's an attribute that's become more important.
Logistics, yeah.
Absolutely.
You trust it's going to go from A to B, and it's not going to be more of a pain.
That's right. And I think some of that comes out of Yellow and what happened with Yellow and just uncertainty there. And it's still translating into the marketplace a bit. Now, I don't think any carriers, Patrick, are in that position, but still uncertainty. And then price competitiveness became more important, as you can well imagine.
And did it become more important, or is it like the inflation that is now in the margins that are around, hasn't it always been an issue, or is it because coming off of COVID, capacity might have been more of a concern than directly leading into price?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything. I mean, the inflationary component obviously is a piece of it. I think the other part of this that doesn't get covered enough is the discipline of the carriers with regards to pricing. So in previous cycles, if you will, a carrier would maybe say, you know what, I'm going to go lower my price because I want to get that business. I want the cash flow.
Sure.
I need the trailer full. But the carriers have been much more disciplined this cycle, from the small carriers to the very large carriers, and
kind of putting a line in the sand, like this is our pricing.
Where we're at.
We're not going to change something every 3 minutes and then have to figure out what to do when there's a new crisis or a completely new pricing 10 minutes from now. Okay.
Absolutely.
And what's happening based on the fact that they're doing that? What is the benefit the carriers are getting, and what is maybe the pushback from the shipper side?
For the carriers, it's all about earnings, obviously, and
they're
able to stabilize that a bit when they've got more consistent pricing. From the shipper's perspective, I always say I can play the game as long as I know the rules.
Okay.
I think the shippers are realizing, Patrick, that the carriers are holding the line more on price. Now, obviously, we're getting into that GRI, general rate increase season.
Right.
And one of the national carriers already announced, 6.6 or 7% GRI. So it'll be interesting to see how the other carriers follow. But
That was, I think, an interesting comment was made. Well, somebody thought A, they were crazy, and B, it's a good thing they came out first with something like that, because it would be real awkward if everybody else came out lower and they're like, hey, showstopper.
That's right. That's right. So they did the right thing by going first. So
Exactly.
It'd be interesting to see how the other carriers follow.
And do you assume that they're going to follow in kind or below? Is there any chance that someone comes out and just, we see it as 7.5? Like, I mean,
I don't know. That's a good question. That's like seeing around corners, but
right. I mean,
it's,
sure.
But I would think they'll all be pretty consistent. I think that 5 to 6% range. And part of it is too, we're all used to lately everything going up every year. Things go up. So now the one thing that's interesting too, you think about the fuel surcharge, because the price of diesel has gone down. So
I don't think I would have recognized that with the inflation that's going on around it.
Yeah, it's interesting how diesel has come down a bit. So there's maybe going to be some pushback on some of the fuel surcharges as diesel, if it continues to decline.
Right.
If not, we'll see. And that's obviously a big place of earnings for the LTL carriers.
Now, historically, I don't even know if it's that far back in history, but so now someone's projecting like, a 6 point whatever increase. Is that normal comparatively, like the last year and the year before, or have things been more stagnant or more dynamic within that?
It depends. I think it's been pretty consistent right now. I mean, a lot of just unknowns as you came out of COVID and just the challenges associated with that across the board, logistics wide. I mean, that's the one thing for companies that are shipping LTL, Patrick. They're probably also shipping some full truckload.
Right.
Air and ocean, they're doing something else. So they're getting hit from every corner. So it's not just the LTL carriers coming in. They're experiencing that across all modes.
And with finding that and getting that data with the 6.5 and all these questions, I guess just from what's the most interesting thing you've found this year that's different from last year or maybe bucks a trend?
I think probably one of the most interesting things is just to watch the evolution of FedEx Freight.
Okay.
And obviously they are, I would guess, going to be spun off. I mean, they've talked about it. I don't think anybody's big enough to buy them, but FedEx Freight is from the national carriers, one of the bigger declines. TForce is another interesting carrier. They're decoupling from that old UPS model, Patrick. So they've got to tear it down to build it back up, and I think they're doing a good job. If we look at someone like one of the carriers that's done exceptionally well and moved the needle is XPO.
Yeah,
Saia as well. Old Dominion's always up there as a premium carrier, and you've got the Estes family with Estes Express doing a wonderful job. And so, yeah, I think a lot of it is consistency. ABF Freight has bounced around a bit. They have employed a dynamic pricing model at times,
which I think it was alluded to that may or may not be a great idea now.
Yeah, it depends. I guess it depends on the freight. Depends on what the company wants to do, but it's caused them to bounce around a little bit in the Mastio study, but they're, again, one of a very good carriers. And really all these carriers are challenging themselves to offer better service and really exceed the customer's expectations. Sometimes it's just difficult.
So, and coming back to one of your first points there, what has made the FedEx Freight so troublesome for an organization that does logistics on the parcel side internationally, day in, day out, everywhere you go? Why is LTL such an issue?
It's a good question, and I can only tell you what the data tells me.
And that's what I'm like. Yeah, I don't expect you to have that magic ball or the inside scoop.
No, I think when we look at some of the areas where FedEx Freight is challenged, one of the areas is knowledgeable and helpful sales reps. I think who they have they're wonderful individuals. They just don't seem to have as many. Their average score versus the other national carriers is 11% below the average on knowledgeable and helpful sales reps. So
how much does that play into what someone's doing?
It plays a lot into it because this is still a relationship business on the LTL. If my price is the same and your price is the same, who do you want to do business with? It's that relationship.
That's an overwhelming reoccurring trend within the logistics space is the relationship build. And is this something where they used to have those reps and they've lost in the competition, or are they grown too fast, too far, and haven't been able to right size?
That's a good question. It seems to me, just following the data over time, they've just decreased the numbers of the sales reps. So, and I know FedEx has been very vigilant and diligent too. They've closed terminals.
Right.
So they've done some things, and sometimes you have a short-term pain for a long-term gain with things like that. So, but yeah, on another note, some of the regional carriers like Daylight Transport does exceptionally well.
Okay.
Daylight, R&L, Dayton, Averitt Express is always in the top 2 or 3 carriers. A smaller carrier in the Northwest Peninsula does a very nice job as well.
And what you get this data back, and you're either handing it out in a universal, hey, everybody come see it when you get a chance, or you give it back to the carrier that's helped you with the data. what do they need to do to get themselves in a better position if they don't like what they see in the results?
Absolutely. That's a great question.
And do they kill the messenger?
No, they don't. They really don't. I think maybe they did a long time ago, but after 20 years and 40,000 interviews later, they're pretty open.
Oh, it's just Kevin again.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, what the hell is he going to tell us? Yeah, right. But no, I think the big thing with the carriers is not just looking at the data from a 30,000 foot level, Patrick, but looking at it by region. So you could take an XPO or a Saia or a Roadrunner and you can segment that data by region, because as a national carrier, let's say with XPO, 15 regions, there may be a couple that are laggards and a couple that are superstars. So how can you leverage what the superstars do to help prop up and lift up the laggards within the business and the enterprise?
And possibly the conversation would become, do we need to, or is the regional popularity here strong enough that if we diversify too much, we lose a part of what makes us special there?
Absolutely. There's that secret sauce by region, and that's the drivers and the terminal managers and the account reps. I mean, that's who makes that up and makes it happen.
So something was said earlier, and I don't think I would have thought of it, but anyone on the dock probably would have told you, 3 days ago, the rep is important, like from the FedEx perspective, but more and more, I think the truck driver itself is probably just, because that's, like we talked about earlier, that's who you're seeing every day. That's who either lovely smile or disheveled grimace is.
And
what
if they're grumpy,
see.
then that's your perception. No, that's a great point, because the carrier, let's say it's XPO, and your driver comes in XPO every day. If he or she's got a smile on her face, they're a problem solver. That's that shipper's perception of the entire organization of XPO.
They're a snapshot. They're the
driver. That driver has a heavy burden, not only just to do what their job is, but to be a representative of the company as well. So I do think the carriers understand that. Sometimes I don't know that the drivers understand how important they actually are.
And is that something that most of the LTL carriers, as they're, onboarding these carrier drivers, are they going through, processes and SOPs of here's how you should do it? Or is it more of like, hey, you know how to drive a truck, by the way, smile every now and then? Is how hard of an internal push is this assumed by all the carriers to understand the same way we do, or
I think
50-50?
Most of them actually probably do, and some of that's going to be the individual as well. I think there's a lot of things, and I do believe that the carriers impress upon that driver that they are a representative of the organization. So they are XPO, they are Saia, they are Daylight, whoever it might be. So I do think the carriers push it, but again, it's ultimately going to be that individual.
And that's, it makes a lot of sense, but it's also crazy that this giant conglomerate carrier is represented by this one person, and the pros and cons of him is what you're going to hold against that. Now, with that, and you're having these conversations with the shippers, and the carriers are going through that. So something where you're like, hey, who said bad about me? Can I go talk to him and make it right? Or I assume you anonymize.
There's an anonymous component. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we do provide the raw data that shares like the state and some demographic information, but none of the company contact name information, but they can look at it. We actually have some carriers that'll roll this up by zip. So like, all right, this terminal serves these zips, so we capture the zip code, Patrick. So a carrier can really get into like a terminal level, but not necessarily a customer level.
I guess that would make sense, and obviously make the shippers be more comfortable with being completely honest. And with that, the carriers can see what they're doing better and what they're doing wrong. As you put this data back out to the shippers, is this just basically, hey, this is how you should, this is your fantasy draft best pick order, or is it something everybody needs to look at it through a different lens? How universal is it?
It's fairly universal. Again, I think some of it is a particular carrier may serve a shipper well in certain lanes, but they may not in another. And part of it's the type of freight too. So is it obviously, as we move into 25, we talked about it earlier, the NMFTA new pricing regulations and the rules around density is going to change a lot of things. So that's kind of a level set realignment in the logic around pricing and what that freight's going to look like on the truck.
And is that something that we know enough about how it's going to impact, that the carriers already have strategies in place, or it's kind of a hurry up and wait?
I think the carriers have strategies in place. I really do. I think there's been enough of a runway for them, and I think the implementation starts in January, but maybe finalizes in May. So they've got some time. There's some companies out there that are selling the dimensioners. So there's obviously technology coming along with that. I know I did see it in the Banyan tool today, where you put in all the information and it'll calculate the density basically. And then, which is a great tool from the Banyan perspective to be ahead of that.
And it's fun fact that was probably put in, 10 years ago when someone first threatened about going the density base. And as we know, these changes do not happen, like same like the electronic BOL and all of that. It's somebody talks about it and everyone gets afraid and worried about it, and the next thing you know, it's 5-6 years before anybody implements it. So
typical.
Exactly. With this, doing this report year after year, do you enhance the questions? Do you look for different metrics to go after each year, or you've kind of got a sweet spot and you're just going to do that? Like, how does that decision make?
That's a great question. So we really do adjust the attributes to some degree, the attribute being how we measure, carrier responsiveness, carrier is trustworthy, price competitiveness. Those are fairly static, so we can compare. But where we do integrate new insights, new questions, we talked about it today around sustainability.
Yeah.
So we had a whole section of questions around Scope 3 emissions.
And was that not there last year?
No, that's new. So we started to add some questions like that, Patrick, around sustainability. So we want to move where the industry moves relative to the questions we ask. So we're thoughtful and mindful of making sure we're staying on top of it. And sustainability is a big thing.
Now, do you get in and ask them what their favorite sports team is too? Do you get
No,
a nice
we don't do that. I mean, mine's the
that?
Kansas City Chiefs, so we can take that off the table right now.
That must be real nice for you. You know,
it's not bad.
Browns.
Oh no.
Yeah, no. Back to this piece. What else could I pull out of all this? Because there's a lot of data there. I know you've got the quadrants as you have them and the parity, but what can I get from this big picture? Because chances are I'm, shipper X, and I've given you some of this data. So it's not surprising that I like them and I don't like these. Why? What am I really getting out of this that I didn't know already?
Well, I think that it's exposure to carriers that maybe you had not thought about using in the past.
Okay.
So there's you have some carriers that had historically struggled and have started to do a better job. I'll pick on a couple that's doing better. Roadrunner, Central Transport, two carriers that are improving in the marketplace. And as a shipper, you may have historically said, you know what, I don't want to deal with those guys. I don't like them. I struggled with them. But that might have been 5 years ago, Patrick. So by seeing this data today and seeing that upward trajectory, I think as a shipper, it opens your eyes to some carriers that you may have put on the back burner from a period of time ago.
Now, as something that we know, and we even talked about before at the conference here, shippers have long memories. How much does this report go to open someone's eyes that still remembers that one shipment that they've been burning over for the past 10 years? It's probably not enough, but is there a confidence level behind any of it? Like what do you say to prove this is worth taking a look at?
I think you need a few years of improvement.
See a trend.
Yeah, you need to see a trend. So if a carrier is better for 1 year, a trend that does not make. So, but if you see that over 2 or 3 or 4 years, then you can start to say, with some certainty and some confidence, if they're continuing to move upward, and maybe it's baby steps, but they're moving upwards, then your willingness to entertain doing business with them again can change.
Right. No, and speaking of kind of trends and it changing and going, a fluke versus a trend, what's a trend in, we talked about that you're asking all these different questions and you're seeing what's most important to the shipper. Mm-hmm. What has trended in the past 2 or 3 years up to a top spot, and not even a top spot, just up, that drastically wasn't there before?
Yeah, I'll tell you one that's moved is ease of doing business. And I know that's an ambiguous question.
I was going to say, how do you define that?
It's very difficult to define, but I think it's defined by so many things. I would say, how do you make it easy for me to give you my money?
Okay.
So as a shipper, I want to work with carriers that make it easy for me. Now, that doesn't mean they roll over on claims and different things like that. But you have
that would be a good metric.
Yeah,
how fast do they agree that they owe me money?
Yeah, So part of what that is just understanding and looking at and doing the basics right. Deliver it with no damage. Pick it up when promised. You're consistent.
So easy when you say it, right?
It's easy. It's the hardest easy thing you'll ever do. So, I mean, you think about a big carrier with all the terminals and all the employees and all the freight, and how can you move that freight the least amount of touches?
Yeah.
And I think that carriers are doing a better job too of securing the freight.
Okay.
In the truck and with the airbags and different things that are going on. I know, like XPO. I don't know if you knew this. XPO builds their own trailers. In Searcy, Arkansas, I believe. I'm not exactly sure. So
I don't think I knew that, but one of the things I have heard recently is that XPO is definitely going, as far as the reputation and perception, very much the old Dominion way, as they're starting to get to that dependable, and it, but not as fun to negotiate with, because they're starting to say, no, I am the pretty girl at the dance, and I get to pick
Yeah. We're seeing the same stuff.
Okay.
I mean, they're definitely moving, what we call it on the value map, they're moving to the right.
Okay.
And improving that perception level and definitely making some headway.
And so from your perspective, you've been doing this how many years in total?
I've been with Mastio 28 years. This is the 20th year of the LTL study.
And how has that study changed from the first year you were with it? Like, were the questions more basic or completely a different way versus what they were for this? How drastic has it evolved?
What's interesting is it's not drastically different.
Okay.
I think the biggest thing is
means you got to have a good core.
Yeah, most of the attributes that we're measuring perception on have not changed.
Because it's not rocket science, right?
It's not. It's pick it up, deliver it, don't break it, give me a correct bill. But I think what has changed are some of the open-ended comments like sustainability. For a number of years ago, it was more about freight tracking and tracing.
Right.
What kind of feedback could we capture there? Now that's become what we call
all
the baseline.
all of those new features are now assumed.
They are absolutely.
Yeah, and if you don't have it, then what's wrong with you?
Yep.
Not, well,
if
these
you don't
guys
have
are
it,
so much better. No, it's just, that's the standard and norm. What's going to be the next standard and norm? Is it going to be that carbon, which, whether if you don't have a European HQ or you don't have, that's a push of your organization as a whole, doesn't seem to be a lot of engagement on the logistics side today.
I agree.
Yeah. What is one of those things that's on that list or out there that's going to be the next, just assumed you have to have that to do business?
I think the sustainability will continue to grow in importance. I don't ever think it's going to be significantly important. I say ever, that's not true. That's a long tail to make that happen. But I think one of the key things over time is we talk about freight tracking and tracing, but visibility into where my freight's exactly at. So I think about the Apple tags. You think about how simple that really is. I can put a tag on it, and if I lose it, I know where it's at. So how can you put something on the freight so you know exactly at any given point in time visibility into where that pallet might be?
Yeah, and that makes sense. But is it something where it's like, hey, that's an extra $5 every time you want to drop another tag on it, or that's just what you get for being with carrier A?
I think there's a way to monetize it. Yeah. I think, some of that's going to depend on the freight, the number of days, if it's a high security, high value type pallet. But some of your fundamental freight, if you're delivering, I don't know, plastic chairs, it's probably not a big deal. But if you're if you're delivering TVs or cell phones or something that's high security, then there's a little bit different, and you can charge for that. It's almost like an accessorial.
And I would assume, and maybe it's not the same in LTL as it is in the truckload and apparently the intermodal space, but is security not just against like claims and actual mistakes, but against bad players and thieves and fraudulent plays? Is that become a piece of concern when doing these questions?
Yeah, not so much yet.
Okay.
I do think it is a big concern. I mean, it's why you drive by terminals and you see big fences with razor wire at the top. So
I just thought that was to keep the ball in.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that's a basketball court out there outside the terminal. So no, I do think it's going to become more important, but very, very dependent on the commodity or the product that's inside of it.
Right.
So
you're not as concerned with the plastic chairs.
You're not. But if it's an electronic or a load of shoes, then there's some differences that the carriers can integrate technology into that.
And with the integration of technology, I know there's a part on there that talks specifically to TMS, which a little bit near and dear to my heart. Yes,
absolutely.
Here. What have you seen with that as far as trending?
We've seen growth. So we ask a question, and yes, do you or do you not use TMS? And so that yes is consistently ticked up. And I think it will consistently. And we do look at it too by size of shipper, number of shipments per week. And you've got a heavier penetration, Patrick, with the bigger.
And that makes a lot of sense. If I'm only doing 2 or 3 shipments, I'll take the pain of, but if I'm doing this day in, day out, multiple hours, I want it as simplified and automated as possible. Where do you go? Are there questions that you put on the brainstorm and then kind of take them off? What does that process look like? Because I imagine you're always trying to enhance the questionnaire, the data you get back. What does that process look like? Do you get all of the shippers also give you an idea for where you look at next time? Do you get feedback from them on Mastio?
That's basically from the shippers. We'll reach out. So we'll start the study again in late June. So about early May, late April, early May, I'll start reaching out and saying, hey, is there anything we're missing?
Okay.
Are there any industry trends coming up? Do we want to try and see around the corner with something different? So it's obviously I can't get them all in the same room.
No.
But I do reach out to all of them and try to capture feedback. And one thing that's fascinating is they all pretty much think the same way. So I may get 10 people that say, hey, Kevin, you need to ask this. And 10 different carriers and want me to ask the same thing, maybe just a little differently.
Yeah, no, it's crazy how it's almost like, you buy a certain car and you see it everywhere. All of a sudden there's a name for it. But within even my world at Banyan, a client will mention something once. The next thing you know, a week's gone by and 4 people have said it and you've never heard it before in your life. And
catches fire.
It's amazing because it does catch fire, but also because I don't think there's singular issues within the LTL space. I think it's enough of a shared process, and with the national players that chances are, if I'm using them, someone else has the exact same concern on the other side.
Absolutely.
So with all of this information, how long does it take you to get those analytics from all of these 40,000 phone calls?
I mean, obviously the 40,000 we did over 20 years. Okay. But
that wasn't just
no. So we did 1,608 interviews this time around.
It's really buried the lead on that.
Really, I know, yeah, right.
But still.
So it was July, August, September, about 3 months. And we try to keep that same time frame so that when we're comparing data from year to year, Patrick, we've got that. It's very linear, and when we do it, so we're very comfortable with the comparisons.
Try to control the variables there. Now, is this something that you've got just somebody with an Excel formula in it, or using some AI to pull some data back? What does that look like from a
Basically,
process?
we have a software program we wrote a number of years ago.
Okay.
We leverage some different methodologies around customer value analysis and net promoter score, NPS. So we talk about that, and a lot of it's just raw data in Excel getting used. We talk about Power BI, some of the work that you guys do with that through Microsoft. And then we do use some AI tools to really look for trends in the data. So we're getting deeper and deeper into that as we go. I've learned a lot from you guys the last couple of days, a lot.
Don't listen to me. Everybody else knows a lot of things. I will lead you the wrong way. No, but you talked right there about whatever the referral, what's the term for that, that you would tell someone to use them, or the broadcast, was it where if you would refer that carrier to somebody else?
Likelihood to recommend.
That's it.
Sorry, Patrick. Yes.
No, you're good.
Yep, likelihood to recommend.
So within that, is it possible for that person or the carriers to be most likely to recommend not necessarily be some of the top answers from the other more straight up questions, or is generally
they generally trend with one another? So if you're satisfied at I'd call it a cellular level by the individual attributes to be happy with them at an overall type level. So they typically dovetail one another.
Not surprising. I was wondering if there was any kind of strange bucks.
No, sometimes you get an anomaly here and there, but typically if it's a carrier in the top 5, top 7 of NPS, they're going to be in the top 5, top 7 in overall.
Now, I think I know the answer to this one, but can a carrier kind of tackle these pieces from a sheer PR and marketing, or is it something where logistics, everybody knows where the rubber meets the road?
Well, they do use it. So Old Dominion last week ran a full page ad in the Wall Street Journal.
Okay.
Referencing their placement as the number 1 national carrier 15 years in a row.
That's a solid accolade.
It's a solid, yes, it is. So yeah, we do see some advertisement. Obviously, we'll work with the carriers to do that and help them promote their performance in the study.
Yeah. So you're like you go into the fast food restaurant and you got the 5-star.
So like a little bit like JD Power.
I was going to say, do you stamp the terminal as you leave?
I wish we could. I'd love my name to be everywhere. The company's name, excuse me.
It's just Kevin.
Yeah.
Just Kevin. No. And I guess as a last piece here, where do you see all of this LTL, like not just the logistics space, and we're getting so much more analytics, and we're trying to use that actionable data. Where are we going to? Here's where you've been doing it for 20 years, and it hasn't changed too much, right? Maybe the insights we pull from it. Where are we going in the next 5 years? And I know we can't see around the corner, but pull out a crystal ball for a little bit.
I think a lot of it will be consistency. I think the market itself, who the carriers are going to be very consistent. I think you may see a Knight Swift maybe make an acquisition.
Okay.
But I think just the general trend of increased visibility, leveraging technology to know where that freight is at, is going to be one of the key things. At the end of the day, you still got to have a truck pick it up.
Yeah.
You got to have a driver drive the truck, and you got to have somebody in accounting do the billing. So
you can change a lot of things.
You can change a lot of things, but you can't replace AI. Can't replace a driver. AI can't replace a dock worker. So I think some of the fundamental tenets of LTL will still be in place long after I'm gone from this world.
Yeah, probably until teleportation somehow.
See, there we go. I hope I'm gone before then.
Yeah.
So
no, and just as we're following or finishing up here, and thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
What's something you have to anybody watching, whether that's on the carrier side, the shipper side, or someone that just accidentally stumbled upon here, whether it's about you, Mastio, or the industry?
Well, first off, I'd like to tell anybody that's watching this that's helped before, thank you. Yeah. That's the key. And if you get a call from Mastio asking for your feedback, we would love it if you took it, because we really do take the data and we share it with the carriers. So
and it helps them in the end.
It does, and ultimately everybody wins. So
Right.
that's the goal we really want to share, and we're, like I said, very thoughtful and thankful for people giving us their time.
I almost feel like we needed like the sad song, like please,
please come help.
Please
help
answer,
us.
Kevin.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
No,
That's the nice name about Mastio. It's a unique name, Patrick.
Right, it is. It is.
It's definitely a valued name in the LTL space, and we're very thankful for that.
I know that when you come and speak with us and show out those insights, it's probably where we get a core of the trends, because from a software perspective, sometimes you get lost in the numbers, and I'm sure as a logistics execution, you're getting lost in your day to day. To step back and not just view what you're doing, but to view it from that is so eye-opening sometimes.
Yeah.
Kevin, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate you. And hopefully, again, we won't wait 2 years.
Sounds
for
good.
The next
we'll do it
one.
again next year.
Exactly.
Thank you, Patrick.
And for everybody watching, thanks again for tuning in for another Tire Tracks podcast. Thanks for joining us here at Connect 24 in Atlanta. And do the whole subscribe thing and see what else I come out with. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.